Good evening and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where truth is our mission, reality our realm, said as we see it, and frankly as well. 3,000
but it's the
horsepower.
next iteration of an existing system.
But it's a design. It's not manufacturing anything.
I think there should be, there are restrictions. You have to be licensed to carry a weapon.
Addiction, and I think that if we took a more compassionate approach, we might find more of a solution.
Radical swing of the pendulum. Now we're, it's more liberal, more progressive, more.
It's time for us to honor those folks who, send comments to it.
And hello again. Welcome to Frankly Speaking, where truth is our mission, reality our realm, said as we see it, and frankly as well. I'm Joe Spina and the illustrious Paul Crowley. Good evening, Paul.
Looking pretty good tonight. I like the new jacket.
You do?
Yeah.
Not new, old.
Old?
Yeah, I lost about 2 pounds, so I can get back into it a little bit.
Good.
Are you out there? Don't eat much ice cream anymore. That's
Lay off the ice cream.
Yeah, and pasta.
That's Joe's weekly tip.
Yeah.
So you know what?
And
No ice cream for me.
Well, here's the real tip tonight for you and for you folks out there. We're going to talk turkey.
We're going to talk turkey, yeah.
Right to it. We're going to talk
Thanksgiving?
turkey.
All right.
Big issue. Right, overriding 2.5. The question is, why? Budget shortfall?
Yeah.
The question, why do we have a budget shortfall, Paul? And a tax hike, is that in store? And then how much would it be? And how's this quote from Councillor LaPierre? He said, boy, we're struggling to meet our obligations. And I'm going to ask the question again, why?
Right.
Over and over and over again. Now, we have a little fact sheet if we can throw up there. Paul, if you can run through it. And these are some of the reasons and rationale for the shortfall. Some legit, some not. And I think you spoke to many of these yourself on other shows. The first one is what there is. Is it up there, the fact sheet? The first one there, Paul?
Yeah, student population is up 23%. We talked about from 13,000 to 16,000.
Exactly.
3,000 increase.
And what time frame, Paul? That's important.
In a very short period of time, 6 years.
Okay.
Yep. By the way, when we had 13,000 students 6 years ago, we had 28 schools, right? And so let's just say that you have 1,000 students in a school, and I know it's more and less depending on whether it's an elementary, a middle, or a high school. But so that means we need 3 additional schools, and we've needed them for quite some time, just to keep up with this.
But let's talk the real issue here, Paul, because we've talked this. Folks, you got to understand this. Back in 1950, the United Nations decided to designate Lynn as a refugee city. So we get refugees coming to us irrespective of whether mayor or the city council has any voice in that.
And the dirty little secret is that there are people who financially benefit from processing refugees that are directing them to come to the city. So
yeah, you're right. Is there a place called ORI? I may be wrong on that.
I don't know.
What they do in effect is that they are contracted by the State Department, mind you, to settle refugees, and not only refugees, but we've had a serious problem in unaccompanied minors, Paul,
right,
which is illegal immigration, basically, for open borders.
Right.
Is that true?
I think they're getting, if not the same, a similar designation as or status as the refugee. In other words, they have a path to citizenship, and they are given, access to benefits and entitlements throughout the system.
But they don't send the dollars. The state and the federal government doesn't spend. No, there are 4 communities that are designated to receive refugees, and let's pass on the unaccompanied minors because I'm not sure of that one. Lynn is one of the primary cities, and we receive proportionally far more than anybody else
in the state.
In the state,
right?
So, and that impacts the school system. And if you have a city that's economic base is shrinking as opposed to expanding, we don't have the commercial property we once had, Paul.
By the way, and I don't know what the numbers are now because they do the census every 10 years, right? Back in 2010, when they did the census, there were something on the order of 91 or 92,000 citizens, right?
Yeah.
In the city. At least that was what the census declared. And I haven't heard anybody say to me that the citizenry the
Census.
legal citizens in Lynn has really changed all that much. So there's been massive growth, but it's been all in the illegal immigrant population or in the
Undocumented, right.
non-citizen
But that's
population.
affecting the tax rate significantly. For example, there's a shortfall this year of $7.5 million in the school budget.
Well, and then the other thing is, what does it cost to educate one student?
Roughly 10 to 12,000.
Right.
Right.
In Lynn, because of, and it's an average because most of the undocumented that come in have language issues. You know, they speak a different language.
Over and above, yeah.
So there are a lot of challenges that they face as well. So $10,000, you know what 3,000 students times $10,000 is?
30 million.
$30 million. So there's a $30 million increase in the cost to educate our kids just because of the increase in
But that's
student
only,
size.
yeah, but that's actually a false figure too, because as you just pointed out a couple of minutes ago, we need 2 to 3 new schools to accommodate
On top of that.
on
right.
top of it. So that is another 65 to 70 million, and we're going to get tricked in this one. Remember the last time that they sold the bill of goods? Oh, well, Thurgood Marshall Middle School, 90 million, but you know, we only got to
Right.
come up with 20%, 18 million, cost us 50.
So let's put a couple of pieces together.
Yeah,
so,
you do that. You're the
we
bean counter.
we talk about the fact that from 2010 to 2016, the cost associated with educating the increased population, just that is $30 million, right? So using a baseline of 2010 to 2016, $30 million increase. And these are predominantly, and I won't say exclusively, but predominantly folks that have been settled into our area, you know,
By outside groups.
outside forces, right? The United Nations, the federal government, the State Department,
And a host of nonprofits who
benefit financially.
who drive their Priuses over in Marblehead and such,
Right.
and drop all of the societal problems on Lynn.
Okay, so
Thank you very
you
much.
have so you have that $30 million increase over
Yeah.
a 6-year period. You also have the determination by the state of Massachusetts a few years ago that the city of Lynn didn't check the right box
I remember that.
on the net school spending calculation, so we have this net school spending shortfall, if you will, right? In other words, we weren't spending enough on the kids in the years past, so they're trying to get that money back, and I think that's that $7.5 million net school spending.
Part of it.
Right. So here we have a shrinking tax base, right?
Relatively speaking, it's a shrinking tax
Okay,
base.
so we have a shrinking tax base
And expanding.
that has no control over the United Nations, the State Department, the federal government, or the state of Massachusetts, being told that they're going to have to come up with another $30 million to pay for these additional kids
And our
and pay off the net school spending problem
Okay,
and build 2 more schools,
at least.
right, on property that people don't want them to build on. So, I mean, talk about getting the hammer. I mean, the city of Lynn is getting hammered. And you know, and maybe we can tie this into one of the comments that we got where somebody says, the results, and he's referring to the voting,
Right.
the results in the nation and those in Lynn shows how out of touch the city is in all areas of thought. And what I think he's saying there is, here we are getting screwed, blued, and tattooed by the state, the feds, the State Department, and the United Nations, and we're supporting, you know, the likes of Hillary Clinton, who wants to keep that stuff going.
And I'll go one step further with you, Paul. You know, that was impressive. What about our state rep? What about our federal rep? Moulton, right? What about Elizabeth Warren? What about Markey? What about Tom McGee? Why aren't they screaming and yelling that we should build that wall and secure that border so we don't have all of these folks who are on their way to Lynn?
We can't afford what we have, and
That's right.
and they just keep
but
sending
do they
more.
care about that, Paul? Do they care about that?
Apparently not.
Do you know that the police got a raise and they're entitled to a raise? I'm not going to argue it. But that's $3 million. Actually, that's very small compared to the school department, right?
Right.
And who hasn't settled yet? As we speak, Union 739 of the fire department, aren't they negotiating?
That's right.
And they're in arbitration?
Right. And once again, outside, because it's an arbitration, and there will be an award by an arbitrator who doesn't know anything about the city of Lynn, doesn't really care about our economic situation. He will, in effect, rule by decree. He will say either they get it or they don't, or if they get it, how much, and all that kind of stuff. Once again, the city will be told, you will spend that money, They're forcing our hands, and as much as I worry about, this thing about the 2.5 override and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that we need this money, the fact of the matter is, with all of the things that are going on, and some of the things that I just laid out, we have no choice but to raise taxes. No other way to do it.
Or cut. There's another way of doing it, cut. Nobody wants to do that. Absolutely no one wants to cut expenses, right?
Right.
Okay. That's part of the problem. Now, the city council, or the majority, and that's going to be coming up, of the 11 members of the city council will have to vote to put it on the ballot for the voters of the city of Lynn to
Do a
decide.
2.5 override.
Right. So the city council and the mayor cannot do it.
Right.
They cannot override 2.5.
So just so that I'm clear on this, and maybe for anybody at home
ahead.
who's not completely clear on what the 2.5, it's been a long time since 2.5. You were around back then, right? You were on the city
I
council.
was the
when
first city council under 2.5,
Right.
as a matter of fact.
So what does that actually mean? So what's a 2.5 mean? Proposition 2.5 means that they can only raise taxes 2.5% or something? Is that basically what it is?
Yeah, they just said that you had to be prudent, and they said that you cannot exceed 2.5% of the full cash value of all taxable properties in the community without the support of the voters.
Right.
Because they have a vested interest.
Right. This is the one mechanism that is different than all the things that we just talked about. It's not the United Nations telling us what to do. It's not the State Department telling us what to do. It's not the federal government telling us what to do. It's not the state of Massachusetts telling us what to do. It's actually the voters actually voting for themselves, right?
Exactly.
The problem is that we're being driven to this by all those things that are out of our control.
Paul, you and I, and the rest of you folks out there that own property in the city of Lynn, paid close to $17 per thousand on the first of this month for real estate tax, correct?
Yep.
And that's not enough to cover anything, to be honest with you, all that much. Without state aid and federal aid, we couldn't run the budget.
Right.
So the budget in the city of Lynn is somewhere, the other accountant's about 250, am I right?
Probably closer to 300.
So close to 3 now?
Yep.
Okay. And of that, probably $1.50 of it is for schools.
Yep.
One way or another.
Right.
Because sometimes the health care doesn't fall under the school
Right.
budget, but it's
Yeah. Using half is a pretty good benchmark.
So much of that money, and with the total revenue that we collect in the city of Lynn from all sources, runs about half of that. Agreed?
Yes.
And we have to rely on outside dollars, namely state and federal dollars,
Yeah. Local aid.
to balance the budget. That comes with strings, Paul.
Every time, right? Well, just think about the Department of Education. So the Department of Education says, we'll give you $105 million towards your education spending in the school, but here's what we expect from you. And by the way, one of those things that they expect is that you check the right box and you do net school spending, a certain amount of net school spending. And if you don't check the box and you don't actually include or you include incorrectly the health costs of your retirees in the net school spending calculation, you will be assessed a penalty for that, which is what's going on right now. Because we didn't check the box. If we could have actually, interestingly enough, it's as simple as saying, if we had checked the box, we wouldn't have a problem. It was like somebody didn't fill out the form correctly and they didn't find out for 20 years. Typical government at work.
In fairness to Judy, the mayor, she said when she was first elected, she's a fiscal conservative.
Yep.
But she said, I really don't want to cut jobs. I don't want to have layoffs. So she's tried to avoid that. She's at the point where she has exhausted all the different options, apparently. And the options are fiscal responsibility,
Right.
making cuts, things of this nature. And the reality is that the spiral keeps going up and up and up against the tax base that has, I mean, for example, commercial property pays double the rate of residential property.
Yep.
What defines commercial property? If someone has a 6-family and lives out of town, is a landlord from wherever, right? And there's a lot of that in Lynn. Is that commercial or is that residential?
I think it's considered residential.
That's my point. Now, you realize that a 6-family has a lot of kids going to school. Whatever the taxes
Right.
from that one building.
Well, the interesting thing is the commercial rate is double,
pretty much.
but when does a commercial, somebody who's paying commercial taxes actually have kids going to school? It doesn't really apply, right? I mean, if they live in the city,
Right.
that means they own their home, so they're paying, residential taxes to pay for the schools. A big part of so in other words, a big part of the covering the cost of education for the kids in the city of Lynn comes from the commercial tax base.
And interestingly, you could make the argument that having high commercial tax rate kills businesses in the city.
Right, it discourages them from coming here as
So
well.
consequently, it can work to your disadvantage. So even though you raise taxes, particularly in commercial, you could actually be depressing your revenue flow.
Right.
That
No,
was
that's right.
proved by,
Right, and it's not a static thing, and this is something that, and tax and spend liberal thinking always has argued that if you lower the tax rate, you get less taxes because you get the percentage.
not true, Paul.
Right, because the base will expand, and I've heard over my. I've been involved in local politics since 2005 when I first decided to run. So that's about 11 years, and through that entire time, every year we go through this process of setting the tax rates and all that kind of stuff. And every time I hear somebody say the same thing, they say, first of all, they say that the business that we have to keep the residential rate as low as possible, and there's like the city council votes to set the rate at the lowest possible rate that you can set the residential factor. And that's a kiss to the residents of the city of Lynn. It basically tells them, look, we're not going to raise your taxes any more than is absolutely necessary. We're going to put all the burden on the state. And then 5 minutes later, they all stand up and they say, well, what would you do? This is during the campaigns. What will you do to deal with the tax situation we have? Well, what we need to do is expand the tax base. And how do you expand the tax base is by, just like you said, lowering the commercial rate, which would put the pressure on the residential rates to push them up, right?
of course.
So they set the rate every year at the lowest possible rate for residents as a kiss to the voters, because they don't want them to knock them out, and then they preach that they got to shrink the tax base on the corporations, on the businesses, so they can raise taxes that way.
So in 1980, when I was on the city council on the Proposition 2.5, I was commissioned to create the Lynn Water Sewer Commission. I was the council representative and held meetings and meetings. The whole purpose of the Lynn Water Sewer Commission was in effect to divert some of the tax base onto a revenue source, otherwise known as water. So when you talk about the property tax in the city of Lynn, you also have to talk about the water sewer as a add-on, which jacks your real property taxes up significantly. In my case, that's another, because I have a in-ground pool and sprinkler system, they charge me $500.
Oh, so you're one of these 1%ers, huh?
No, I'm not a 1%er. Right now they're going to make me a 0%er. They're taking all my money, if you want to know the truth. And by the way, I had a big argument with them, and I was on the Lynn Water Sewer Commission, and I'm the one who put the rule in that was repealed. Listen to this, folks. If you have a sprinkler system, it is obvious that the water that you're sprinkling along with doesn't affect the sewer system. It evaporates. If you have an in-ground pool or any pool, that water that you put into the pool, right, does not go into the sewer system, right? It evaporates. Agreed?
Yep.
But for every gallon of water you use, they have an attachment that there's an equivalency in the sewer rate. So if you're paying $1, we'll say, for sewer, and then for water, and $3 for sewer, they put them together, even though you're not impacting the
Right.
sewer system.
Right. I remember that they said, well, if you want to fix that, you have to add a separate meter.
I have a separate meter, but how do you make the water go through the separate meter to go into the pools? How do you do that? How do you ascertain that?
You have to.
A sprinkler system does that, but not a hose. How do you fill a pool?
So you got to have an adapter connected to the
You
sprinkler
have a lot
system.
of adapters. The point of the matter is that it's a sneaky way to jack your real estate tax up by saying that we're not jacking it up. That was the whole premise on which the Lynn Water Sewer Commission was created, because it had a revenue source, otherwise known as water. And people, which is fine because you can control that. You see, you can't control your property tax, but you can't control your consumption.
Right.
And it's fascinating. But now they put an attachment on there, which is totally unfair, an equation, where they linked water usage and as if that every drop of water that you use goes into the sewer, which it doesn't. And
Right.
I pointed that out when I was in Lynn Water Sewer Commission, and I quickly was defeated by the left, that couldn't stand this fiscal responsibility. Not only that, Paul, I turned around and I made certain that if you're going to have a rate, charge 105%. Take that other 5% and put it into a rainy day fund, so in the out years you can reline and clean the pipes without going out for bonding. How long do you think that lasted?
Until you were gone.
Yeah, until I was gone, they immediately rescinded that one.
Right.
So they come up with artificial tax decreases or rate decreases. I'm sick of it. Now, the truth of the matter is you have people who have not been imaginative enough. Tommy McGee was talking about the city of Lynn being boxed in. And that quote comes out of the fact that the ferry, bing, bing, is once again gone. And there's finger pointing. You get that finger pointing up there?
Yeah.
The finger pointing, which way? Charlie Baker's finger pointing, saying it's the city of Lynn that,
Right.
it's not viable. You didn't promote it enough to get ridership. And the other ones are saying, you didn't give us the money. And they say, oh, yes, we did. We offered to give you a study, to do a study to build up viability, right? So what's the answer? Is the ferry a big deal? Is that stimulus for the city of Lynn?
I think it can be helpful, but I don't think, again, it's just like anything else. Why would you spend this much money to do this, to have this much impact? I mean, you want to have the money you're spending have the kind of impact that will make it worthwhile, right?
Well, they have this thing called LEED. What's
Yeah.
that board? J Ash
Yeah,
and Company?
right. Yep.
Cardell, who else is on that thing? The mayor, I'm sure.
Yeah, Seth
Bolton.
Moulton, yeah.
And what's LEED all about? What's that stand for, Paul?
I don't know exactly.
You know, neither do I.
Lynn Economic and
Something or other.
and Development.
Has anything happened?
Well, they got $2.5 million to do some work around where the market basket is going to go, and they got $1.2 million to do some sewer work down on the Linway when they put in the 350 units down there. So they've gotten some money out of it, yep. And I think they're going to be getting another $1 million through the Seaport Economic
That's all
Council.
good and well, Paul, but are we getting businesses? Are we getting income coming from that? And the answer is, listen,
Okay, so wait, all right, here we go. So, $80 million apartment buildings on the old Beacon Chevrolet site. 350 units is going to be starting in about, I guess next spring they're going to start. They'll break ground.
Commercial tax rate or residential tax rate?
Residential rate, but it's going to be 350 units versus a fallow, empty lot.
I
unbuildable.
understand it, but they're getting a residential rate, not a commercial rate.
They are.
All right, that's
I
my whole
think,
point.
yeah.
That's my whole point. Why do we have a commercial rate? So that's picking and choosing, isn't it?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
It isn't?
Well,
I mean, they're not.
They're making it more viable for residential
Oh, really?
developments versus business developments.
But that's also a commercial enterprise, by definition.
Yep.
Okay, but it's not paying a commercial rate, and I'll guarantee you got a tax break to put those units in, right?
Right. But the whole idea of a public-private partnership, if you can spur the development of those 350 units by, putting a little gas on the flame, to get it going, you go from. I would guess that the the amount of taxes paid on an empty lot within the area of $10,000 to $20,000 a year.
Go ahead.
350 units where they are
Are
paying
these condo units, Paul, or are these apartments?
market rate apartments. So they're going to be generating,
When you say market rate apartments, is any of it subsidized?
no,
What,
Zero.
are they all 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom? How are they?
2 bedrooms is the max, I think.
Okay, so it's not going to impact the school system that significantly, right?
Right.
That's what you're telling me?
Yep.
All right. And what's the market that they're trying to attack?
They're going to try to, it's going to be for the outlying people that can't afford closer into Boston and so forth, which means that there'll be 350 probably single or married couples, yuppies or...
So they could revisit the ferry when in fact those things are put in place.
By the way, part of, it hasn't been announced yet, but I'm reasonably hopeful that there'll be $1 million being made available through another grant opportunity through the Seaport Economic Council, of which I'm on the committee, to help build they have the requirements when you build along the water is that you have to connect the water with a walkway that will run right along the water's edge. So they have to do that as part of the project. So they have to build a boardwalk or whatever from one end of their property to the other, and the other end of the property is where the
regulation.
ferry. Yes, but what will happen is it will take it right to the ferry.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, if you live in this apartment complex, you can come out of your unit, walk to the boardwalk, and walk 1/8 of a mile to the ferry.
That's also subsidizing the developer because you're putting in a walkway that he might have been able to put in and should have put in as a condition of him building that to start with, correct?
Right.
All right.
So
there's 100 different ways to play it.
I don't have any problem with your comment that it's a subsidy, but my point is that part of this public-private partnership is where you do get some support from the local, and by the way, most of this money is coming from the state. So if it isn't coming to Lynn, it's going to somewhere else.
So this finger pointing at Charlie Baker is disingenuous. They offered to put up the money for a study to see if it could be viable, if there were things that could be done advertising-wise and otherwise, marketing, in order to get ridership up that would make it viable and feasible. Now, here's the best part, and nobody talks about that. The $4.5 million that would have come out of the federal government treasury doesn't come out now. So, in effect, we saved the federal government $4.5 million for a ferry of 149 seats that isn't going to be operating. That would have went bankrupt anyhow.
Well, and we talked about this on a show before, and there's the $4.5 million ferry was something that was placed in the queue, but it was not a guarantee or a promise. It may have sounded like that in the newspaper, but there's no guarantees that we were going to ever get that money for the ferry at all. And by the way, what good is the ferry if there is no ferry service? So what I would like to say about this whole thing is the lead and the Seaport Economic Council and the Baker administration trying to, help to get things going in the city of Lynn is a positive thing. Got $2.5 million to help the market basket over there in West Lynn, over by the old Factory of the Future. There's $1.2 million that's going to go to help build sewer and water connections to that site down on the Beacon site. There's potentially another $1 million to create that boardwalk. So there's close to $5 million being spent on a number of infrastructure projects that will support the development of an $80 million project that the investors will do, that will create a number of units, which
I'm
all
hearing-
good stuff. Now, the underlying benefit to this that maybe people don't see, and this is why I pushed for it in the first place, was now the ferry has built in another 350 times, say 1.5, so well over 500 potential customers living right next door that are, that work in Boston, want to live nearby, and be willing to take that ferry every day and can get there easily. So So by virtue of supporting that kind of project and that kind of spending, now the argument that they make about operationally the ferry working makes much more sense. So
It does, Paul, and this is precisely what Baker did. They put a pilot program there, and that pilot program demonstrated that it wasn't viable.
right.
2 years
Baker
worth.
didn't
And then
put
they
it in.
said, and
It
they
was put in
said,
under the Patrick administration.
pardon?
It was put in under the Patrick administration.
Okay, but
anyway.
the pilot program pointed
Didn't-
out,
didn't meet its
demonstrated
targets.
that it wasn't viable.
Right.
So Baker turned around and he said, look, I'm going to give you another shot at it. I will fund a study, a comprehensive study, to see if we can make this viable. The city never followed through on that.
Right.
So, where's the finger pointing? Exactly.
The scarecrow.
You got it. Two different directions. We must explore all options. That's what I hear from all these what does that mean, translated, Paul? Exploring all options when you have a shortfall?
Well, that's code for, and I don't know who said that, but this is the way I interpret it. That's code for, I don't want to raise taxes at all. I want to figure out a way to do this without raising taxes. But in the end, we're going to have to raise taxes.
But actually, it means, translated, we're going to raise taxes.
Right.
Right? So the bottom line is, they're not going to explore any options because there are no options. There's two possibilities, Paul. You
Raise-
either cut spending or you raise taxes.
Right.
Now, when is the last time you've seen spending being cut?
No. Well, I was telling you offline beforehand.
Yeah.
Whenever I propose doing things that where employee wages would be impacted negatively by making cuts, it led to my demise on the city council. So we know that nobody's going to be jumping for joy at that idea.
Folks, in my term on the city council, the Lynn school budget, cumulative budget, was $25 million. Today, it's more than 10 times that number. Am I correct?
No, it's about 150, so it's 6 times.
You just told me a little while ago that it's about 300 million for the total. The total budget of the city is about 300 million, and school would be about $150.
Right, so 6x.
So I thank you for correcting me on that. So 25 million. That's a factor of about 6, right? 6 times, right?
Yep.
And I don't know. Have things gone up 6 times, 6 plus? What did the car
36
cost?
years.
What did an average automobile cost in 2000? What do you think? 10 grand? 15 grand?
A brand new car in 2000?
Yeah, an average car.
I don't know. 2004 it was 10,000 for. I bought a Ford Escort for $10,000 in 2000.
So that means 6 times that Ford Escort would be 60 grand today?
That was only 12 years ago.
Well, let's go back to 1980. Let's see, if you bought an average house in 1980, 50,000?
Google it at home, folks. You just say how much did a car cost in 1980, and you'll get
Right,
a sense
an average car, an average home and stuff. Has it gone up 6-fold? That's the point. If it hasn't, then something is wrong.
Right.
So you can adjust things if that is what
Right.
has been.
Well, and I would argue that the things that the government takes control of never just grows gradually.
and then, yeah.
You got education, healthcare. With or without Obamacare, the cost to you and me in the past 20 years has been double-digit increases year over year. It's some years not so much, but on average I think it's double-digit increases. Same with education, at the secondary level, colleges where they subsidize financial aid and all that kind of stuff, and the student loans. So what does it tell you? Whatever government gets involved, it gets out of control.
Paul, is there an unintended consequence in a positive sense if you shut the border down? Lynn becomes a beneficiary of that, doesn't it?
It would
Because it will not
stop
have-
the flow of
that benefits the city.
Yep.
Otherwise, be perpetual. There are other.
Get a chance. Look, we take care of the ones that are here and just kind of figure it out. But we don't, have the onslaught of.
What about Common Core? Get rid of Common Core. That takes away a lot of mandates that are extraneous expenses to the school system. Correct?
Right. I mean, when I was on the city council, I remember, and I don't know, I couldn't speak to the specific ideas, but there would be one idea or another floated about what we could do to make things better and all this kind of stuff, right? And every single time an idea got floated, the first thing I would hear was, first of all, in Boston, at the Department of Education in Boston, it wouldn't work because of a rule A, B, C, D, E, Title IX, whatever it is, they throw something out there. And then when you get past that, then you have to deal with the federal regulations, and they say, if you don't do it this way, this way, this way, and this way, you don't get a nickel. So everybody's, so while I, applaud the work of school administrators, we talk about Dr. Latham and how smart and great job she does with the kids and all that kind of stuff. 90% of her work on a daily basis is dealing with two things that if she didn't have to deal with, she could really do it. I mean, she could do 10 times the job, and that is dealing with her funder, which is Department of Education, both federal and state, and then working with the union. So the beneficiaries are the kids, but there's all these external factors dictating how you can do anything, and it's just frustrating.
When is the last time you ever heard a union say that it wants to economize?
Never. Well, look, it's
an oxymoron, isn't
it? Look, they went out. How much money did the union spend to defeat Question 2? I mean, I don't know what the number is, but I know they spent a lot of money, and the reason they wanted to do that is because they have a nice little gig going and they don't want to mess with it.
Anyways, we must have a way, says Councilor LaPierre, we must have a way to settle union contracts, and we can't by going to the taxpayer every time we settle an agreement. So, what do? I mean, saying, oh, the unions got to honor their contracts, right? What's the only way you can honor their contracts if they want more money? That means we have to raise taxes. Now, if you're capped by Proposition 2.5, you're in a quandary.
Right.
That means you're going to have to cut. You're going to have to become efficient, which nobody wants to do.
So put on your prognostication hat and tell me, what do you think will happen if, assuming it goes to a referendum? That would mean that next November, when we're actually at a time when we're voting for a new mayor, new city councilors, and new school committee members, if they have it on the ballot, do you support or oppose Proposition 2.5? How do you think that the vote will turn out? First of all, will that mean a much higher turnout because of that? Because of the, one side or the other?
What do you think, Paul? You're asking me, I'll tell you. Folks, do we have the graphic, Pedro, of the majority, and there's a turkey with a bag over his head? Do you have that graphic? If we throw that up, why do you think that turkey has a bag over its head, Paul?
Because you couldn't find a desk with
They're
a councilor
hiding. They don't want to take a vote on this under any circumstances, right? So, all they have to do, by the way, the city council, is very simple. They can argue, we're just putting it on the ballot. We're taking no position.
We'll leave it up to the voters.
We'll leave it up to, which is what they should be doing to start with, right? Now, they can refuse to put it on the ballot and say, we're not going to test the override of 2.5. But you know that they're going to put it on the ballot.
Right.
Would you bet that they're going to put it on the ballot?
Yes.
Okay.
It's going on the ballot.
It's going on the ballot.
And I wonder how the voters feel about that.
Do you think that the taxpayers in the city of Lynn, who are getting creamed, are going to vote for an override?
The ones who are in the teachers union and the ones who have babies in the school system will support it. But those who don't have kids in the school system and those who aren't teachers themselves will not. And I don't know how that breaks down. But I do know one thing, and that is that because of the original rules around education unions, they don't have to live in the city of Lynn. And a lot of them don't, right?
Of course not. Because the argument is that you don't have all that skill set in order to fill all the various skill sets you need in the school department. Well, which is a phony argument, But
yeah, and I didn't really want to get into that argument.
Either,
but the point of the matter is that they, if there's, I don't know how many school teachers are there. I mean,
I think there's 1,000 or more, aren't there?
I think the whole school department is about 1,600 people.
That's a lot,
right? So everybody in the school department, I think, would support getting a raise, right?
Look,
having more money.
I'm saying this. I'm saying that the only way that we can give the police, the fire, the city workers, the teachers, the compensation that they deserve that's equitable, is that a good word, equitable? Is that you have to have an equitable tax base. You have to have a tax base that can generate the funds to fund that. Now, in the case that we have to take on problems, societal problems, which we do, educationally, otherwise, that are not affected in our surrounding communities, the federal and the state dollars should follow.
Right.
Just like they talk about if a kid goes to KIPP Academy on the charter schools, that money follows the kid and it should return. Now, what's happened in the city of Lynn and Mayor Judy and Kathy Latham, they're not getting the federal and state dollars that they're entitled to take care of the problems that we're taking care of.
They get them. They don't get them initially, but they do get them in subsequent years.
But by the time the subsequent years come about, the piggy bank's been broken.
Right.
So it's a terrible place for the mayor to be in, and this is why Donald Trump won. By the way,
Absolutely. People are fed up with it, and I'm one of them.
So your question is self-answered. Come November of next year, then override of Prop 2.5 has no chance.
It's going to fail. Yeah.
None. Okay? So what do we do then? What does the mayor, what does the city council do then? What are their options then?
Well,
the unpleasant option is they're going to have to shrink the size of government.
Right.
That's simple. They have to reorganize it.
Right. So let's talk about this a little bit more kind of broadly. So in addition to voting on whether or not to have the override or not, you'll also have voting for the mayors and the city council and for the school committee. I'm curious if it's going to fail, that means that there will be a strong push for it to fail, right? Because you got to remember, while what you say makes true, we also know that an organized minority controls a disorganized majority, right?
You like that, huh?
I do like that. So if the organized unions, which are clearly a minority,
Okay.
which they are, and they always do, if they rally together,
Who else is gonna be
they
behind it?
could pull this off.
Who else is going to be behind it? I will bet you that the Lynn item will be advocating for an override 24/7.
Right before they leave to go to their other community where they live.
Right. So they're going to be big proponents of an override.
Right.
Agreed?
Right.
So is the Linear Chamber of Commerce. Right?
Right.
They're all going to be for an override. The same group that was opposed to Donald Trump on the national level is the same local level types
Right.
that are going to be for the override of 2.5. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So now the question is, let's assume that the mayor has an opponent. Mm-hmm. Chances are she's going to, right? Mm-hmm. If the override fails, does she win or lose?
She wins.
Right. And if the override passes,
She loses.
Right.
Sour grapes.
Sour grapes.
Sour
We're gonna
grapes.
Move on to another topic here. Yeah.
Well, because it's not. It's
This
actually.
is my favorite topic.
It's actually pretty much consistent with stuff, because what had happened is everybody lost here. They were all supposed to win, and Paul, why don't you let the folks know who this basket of dastardly sour grapes are?
Okay.
Sore losers, actually.
So is it John Bezos? Is it?
Yeah, it's Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Bezos. That's the guy that he owns the Washington Post. He's also the founder and lead stockholder in Amazon.com, which value went down by $35 billion since
Obama.
Trump
I
won.
mean, Trump got elected.
Right.
Yeah.
This guy over there underneath the New York Times, that's Carlos Slim.
Yeah, Carlos
right?
Slim,
Right? He is the richest man in the world,
one of the richest.
right? And he's from Mexico.
Right.
And he runs the New York Times.
He has the largest share of the New York Times. Yeah.
These two guys, run the two most liberal newspapers, and these are propaganda-based newspapers that hit all the positive about Donald Trump and all the negative about Hillary Clinton throughout the election, so that people that were paying attention,
yeah.
so the people were paying attention to these news articles were being misinformed about the true
They
nature
still
of the
are,
election.
Paul.
Right. They still are.
They haven't stopped. Now, the New York Times came out with a confession.
Wasn't that great?
Yeah, a confession.
They got a hernia having it too,
Right.
because they didn't admit to doing anything wrong, but we're going to do everything to change the way they do it.
Oh, they admitted that they were not fair in this election, right? And they decided to remain unfair when it comes to Trump.
Right.
Right? I mean, so, and then you have your favorite guy of all, with all the,
George Soros.
yeah, Judge Soros,
So these guys,
these three.
so these three guys probably have, are up there in terms of the three most influential elites in this country.
In the world.
In the world, right? They have such great impact. I mean, Carlos Slim, richest man in the world, so he's probably worth like $50 billion. Soros is probably worth $40 billion. And Bezos, before last week, was probably worth $40 billion, right?
I would tend to think that we conservatively, we could say that the three of them have about $150 billion in their
Okay,
pocket.
and these three guys are trying to decide how we will live in
Well,
this country.
George Soros is so treacherous that he bet against the United States, he bet against the British in order to
Yeah.
make money on.
Yeah.
He's a money guy,
Yeah,
right?
he's more into the finances than he is into anything else. But what he does is he takes a lot of the money he makes in finance and he uses it to fund like these protesters out in Portland.
That's him.
Yeah, he's
funding them.
They actually had five. They showed a picture of five buses from Wisconsin, right? Mm-hmm. They were all lined up in Portland, Oregon, right? Mm-hmm. So they had 5 busloads of crazies. These are probably the same people that were at the State House when Scott. Remember when the governor for Wisconsin was changing the laws
with the unions, right?
Right, and they all had a sit-in inside. It's probably the same people. But anyway, my point is that he hires people to protest and to
He
agitate.
hired people to go in to Trump's campaign rallies to punch women,
Right.
Specifically to punch women,
Right in front of the
and
cameras.
they were paid $1,500 to do it. And the fellow who ran that operation, funded by George Soros, visited Obama
300 times.
300 times, and and his wife is a congresswoman,
Right.
Right, and they finally had to leave.
But other than that, it's pretty fair, right?
Oh yeah, Steve Bannon. They're all freaking out over Steve Bannon from Breitbart News. Alan Dershowitz came out today. He said he's nowhere near. The last thing he is an anti-Semite, which you're all calling him. And there are folks coming out there saying he's definitely not a racist. Right. He's definitely not this, that, and the rest of it. Meanwhile, I never heard the press talk about a racist and a misogynist, otherwise known as Reverend Wright,
Jeremiah
or
Wright.
a bomb thrower that killed people, otherwise known as William Ayers. That didn't happen. This guy puts one guy, Steve Bannon,
Right.
on, and they're going spastic.
Right. So, I have a philosophy that I'd like to share with the folks at home.
Yeah.
You hear us all the time talking about how ABC, NBC, and CBS are not being honest about what's going on. Just know that that's the case. First of all, you shouldn't even be watching these to get your national news. You should be, going to find a website that you're comfortable with. But basically, so if CNN says it, it ain't true. Simple as that. I mean,
Certainly isn't. It certainly isn't. CNN is going to be sued by Breitbart, by the way, for putting out a fast narrative on Bannon. Let's do a quotes, because we only got a few more minutes.
Okay.
This first quote?
Creditors have better memories than debtors.
You love
Ben
that, don't you?
Franklin. Yeah.
You like that one, huh?
Why is that? Because the debtor's glad to forget that he owes the money.
Paul, I probably have 10 bets of $100 out there that I took Donald Trump, and everybody was giggling. They kept telling me, "Oh, we'll settle. Why don't you settle now?" I haven't heard from one of them.
Right.
My $1,000 floating somewhere in the air hasn't come my way. Goes to show you about the liberal left and their honor. The next one. You love this one.
The press takes, and this is referring to Trump, the press takes him literally but not seriously, and his supporters take him seriously but not literally. And that's Selena Zito, and I don't know who she is.
And she wrote in The Atlantic, which
Oh,
is a very
yeah.
left-wing thing there.
Yeah.
And that's profound.
It really is, you know, and that's it. And that's how the press is able to, you know, to character assassinate Trump, is by taking everything he says literally.
And out of context.
Right. You know, and that's their game, you know.
Right, exactly. This is a famous one.
I love this one because, you know, he isn't saying it. By the way, so elections have consequences. Barack Obama, this was not last week, this was 8 years ago. He said it when he won.
And
Elections
he also
have
said it to Paul Ryan when Paul Ryan was trying to negotiate with him.
Right.
And he said to Paul Ryan,
Elections, no, he said it was something similar, but
very similar to it,
Yeah.
elections have consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. But now, first of all, he's silent on this point, and the liberal left, the mainstream media, the newspapers, all the pundits, and all the Democrats, frankly, in the federal government, are outraged that
They're violent, Paul.
That Donald
They're
Trump can even
hypocritical
be the
violent
president.
That said that Donald Trump was going to, if Hillary got elected, that all these Trump folks were going to have a revolution, we're going to do A, B, C, D. It's the opposite.
Right.
All of the left-wing cuckoo. By the way, those folks that you talked about that were in Portland, Oregon, and all over the place, they didn't vote.
Yeah, they said more than
They're not
half
even
of
registered to vote.
more than half of them aren't even registered to vote. Imagine
Exactly.
that. They're just getting $15 an hour to cause havoc. They
So
get
they get- so
three
they-
squares a day and $15 an hour.
And if they come to Massachusetts, they can have some pot for nothing, you know, and same in Colorado. But the last one is a historical one, and it set the pattern.
To the victor belong the spoils. And that was after the Jacksonian election in 1828.
Right, and that was Senator from New York, naturally, William Marcy. And that mentality has always been the hallmark of the progressive left. To the victor belongs the spoils. Except, Paul,
If we win.
if a conservative wins, it is, I'm scared, I'm for... You hear people talking about they're scared. What are they scared of, Paul?
How about on college campuses where they're getting they're having safe spaces and you know, comfort dogs, and you know, they treat them like snowflakes.
You know, Paul, I was fascinated by all these folks that said that they were going to leave the country, of which none did. I wish they did. You and I'd be more than happy to buy them tickets. Poor airlines are going to go broke.
They were only kidding.
Yeah. None of them wanted to go to Mexico.
I wonder why. I wonder how many undocumented United States citizens there are in Mexico.
Interesting. Zero, huh? But all of these supposed... I was only kidding. Al Sharpton. I would select that. Lena Dunham. Who else was there? Miley Cyrus was crying. I don't know what she was crying about.
Cher was going to go to Jupiter.
Really?
She missed the flight, though.
By the way, I'm waiting till George Stephanopoulos, his wife, goes to Australia.
Oh.
She said she wouldn't. She hasn't done
Take
it yet.
him with her.
Right. Now, that makes sense. If you're going to bolt the United States, Australia's not a bad place to go.
Right.
So, good luck, Mrs.
Right.
Stephanopoulos.
And you know, just a point on the drain the swamp stuff. You know, I mean, I didn't see the whole thing, but because I refuse to watch these shows. But Leslie Stahl interviewed Donald Trump on 60 Minutes.
From Swampscott.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she asked the question. You know, she says, you know, why are you hiring all these lobbyists when your intention is to drain the swamp, right? Typical left wing kind of, you know, gotcha, you know, type of thing. But here's my point, right? And I don't really think that they should be hiring lobbyists. I kind of agree generally. We don't want lobbyists to come in and just overrun the place. But the problem isn't necessarily the lobbyists. It's the guys and gals that are running the IRS, the ones that are running the State Department, the ones that are running the Department of Justice, the ones that are, you know, in all these key positions, you know, that control all the levers of power. That's where you have to make the significant changes. And then you start passing laws like Donald Trump is talking about, which will be something on the order of, if you come into government, you must, you can't go into lobbying for X number of years.
5 years.
Yep.
Never with foreign.
Right, and never with foreign. And that's how you do it. But he has to first, I mean, you know, this business that, oh, you're hiring lobbyists, I mean, that's all there are. Everybody's got a special interest, right? So he's got to start
But
somewhere.
here's the important thing. Folks, listen to this. This is going to be a brilliant, brilliant choice for Secretary of State. Giuliani. You know why he passed on Attorney General? Because he's going to go to that place that's infested. That's the swamp, the State Department. Hillary Clinton ran it.
Foggy
He's
bottom.
going to get rid of all that corruption, all that took place in that State Department. That is why he's going to talk about draining the swamp. If you want to drain a swamp, Paul, you better get plumbers. People
Right.
don't know about how to drain a swamp.
Right.
So that's why you have to use some people, maybe on the inside. They know. Just like Donald Trump said, I'm the best guy to clean the swamp because I played with those guys. I know
Right.
how they think.
Right.
And that's makes
Right?
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. And for you know, what's interesting is there are a number of people that are freaking out over this, but you'd be surprised at some of the people who aren't.
On that note, next week, we're going to talk about draining swamps. Stay tuned.